Boa tarde ou boa
Good
noite.
afternoon, good evening. I hope you are all well and safe. I am Moema Salgado from the Faith in Climate Initiative of ISER, the Institute of Religious Studies, an organization of the Brazilian Society. I would like to begin by thanking all those who are with us from all countries, from Brazil, and from different regions of Brazil. It is an honor to be part of the Climate Week of New York City for the second time. And on behalf of ISER, I would like to thank the Climate Group, organizer of the Climate Week, to give us this space in such an important space for dialogue and interaction. I also want to thank our guests for today, Mameto Nangetu, Amangai Pataxó, Marcelo Rocha, who is arriving, and Pedro Ribeiro, besides our moderator, Julia Rossi. It is a great pleasure to have so much diversity, and also with regards to the region. Mameto is in Bahia, Amangai is in the north of Brazil, Pedro Ribeiro is in Rio, and Marcelo is in São Paulo. For those who do not know about our work, our institute tries to promote dialogue between different faith communities, traditional peoples, scientists, environmentalists, gathering supplementary expertise with the main purpose of bringing people together and strengthening actions to face the climate crisis, which is reaching all of us, no matter what faith or geography we belong to. And I will give the floor to Julia, who will be our moderator. But before that, since I love symbolic meanings, I would like to say that I am very touched by the diversity of this encounter in terms of geography, religiousness, ages, and this is happening in the beginning of our spring in the Southern Hemisphere. And today I learned from a friend of the importance of the spring equinox as the end of a cycle and beginning of a new cycle. So I want to celebrate the beginning of our spring, wishing that this can bring a new cycle, one with more respect for all beings, a cycle of more care for forests, a greater personality in the cities, more dialogue, and more action against the climate crisis above all. So thank you all again, and I give the floor to our moderator. Good evening to all. Thank you, Moema, for introducing this beautiful roundtable. I also want to thank our guests for being here. It is an honor to talk to you. We would love to be physically together, but for the time being, we will have to do with the online meeting. I would like to introduce our guests. Amangai Pataxó belongs to the Pataxó Hai people, and also Terena. She is the national network agent for the Engajamundo Youth Association, and also an indigenous communicator of the Voices of the Forest. She is from Bahia, and she studies veterinary medicine in the Federal University of the Recôncavo da Bahia, UFRB. Mameto Nangeto is from the Angola Nation, Master of Afro-Amazon Culture and Racial Equality Counselor of the City of Belém do Pará. Pedro Ribeiro is Senior Manager of the Adaptation and Implementation Team at C40 Cities. He manages the Global Management Network for Urban Floods. He supports development of climate action in all the C40 cities. They have committed to find solutions based in nature to reduce the impact of climate change in urban centers. Pedro was, before the C40, Pedro was in the Rio de Janeiro City Resilience Office, where he worked on climate vulnerabilities of the city, as well as heat waves, droughts, and floods. He is graduated in environmental sciences in the Federal University of Rio and has a graduate degree in ecological landscaping. Marcelo Rocha is from São Paulo. He is a photographer. He is very active in the Black movement, and he was one of the Brazilian voices during COP25, and he was chosen in the event as one of the 100 Black people that are the most influent in our decade. He also works to support artists from slums in São Paulo, and the climax of that was the São Paulo International Music Week in 2021. And he also has a performance in São Paulo. He spoke in the TEDx. Thank you all. We will divide our live into 3 parts. I will ask one question, which all our guests will answer. Then we will have a second round of questions to each of our guests, and then we will open for public comments. I will begin our first round with my first question, which is based on your contexts and perceptions. How can cities and forests interfere in each other in face of the climate changes? I would like to have Pedro beginning, and each one will have 5 minutes. Thank you, Julia. Good evening to all. Thank you, Moema, for inviting me, and thank you for the opportunity of participating in this plural roundtable. This is very important that we can exchange experiences with different communities, the scientific world, and all the different faith groups that are here struggling for a better climate in our cities. I want to speak less about tragedy because every day, and everybody who is participating in this discussion believes in climate change. I don't think we have to explain why we're here. We all see droughts and floods, especially in Brazil. Sometimes people say it's simply bad luck, but all climate models do forecast that this will happen with greater frequency and will impact everybody. So my point here will be about adaptation. What can we do to connect cities to forests in order to adapt the urban centers, cities, to climate change? And the crucial point here is that we have to bring down a barrier between humans and ecosystems. It is very common to see most of the population considering human beings as not being part of the ecosystem. They see cities and forests as 2 separate environments. And this is something that is not true. Research has proven that, especially in the Amazon forest, how the species existing there were selected by the indigenous groups because of their value in terms of food and other resources that work for these communities. So this connection between man and forest should also be reflected in the cities. Cities are being built and developed without considering their ecosystem. Before we built cities, there was an ecosystem with human populations already living, and they were totally destroyed or ignored so that this new urban environment could be built. And today, the lack of connection between the cities and their ecosystem has been causing the so-called local tragedies that we consider. So when we see a big flood in a city, it's simply happening because there was a river underground, and it simply crops up, it appears and fills when there is hard rain, and it floods the whole area. What is interesting is that in the cities, we still have a strong connection of the longer established population with the conservation of the environment. I favor the conservation of the environment. Preservation is leaving nature untouched, but conservation implies that we can manage our environment in a more sustainable way so that it can be reintroduced in the city. So I have two examples of two large cities in Brazil, Rio and Salvador. If you consider the areas that were reforested, recent studies discovered over 2,000 coal mines in the peripheral forests of Rio. So the forests were cut down, and we find mineral samples that were preserved, and these species are found because at the time of the slaves, the African slaves simply denied and refused to cut them because they knew originally that those species were important and should not be cut down. Another important example is Salvador. I believe Mameto can talk about this. There is a very highly preserved area at the center of the city of Salvador where the different religions are practiced in the open areas in the center of the city. So there is this direct correlation between the populations that live in contact with the earth, with preservation. And this is something that we have to bring back. We need to understand the ecosystems in which these cities are located so that we can recover this relationship between man and nature in the cities and stop thinking that the forest is far away in the Amazon and that the city is where we live. The forests have to permeate cities, whatever forests they are. Coastal forests, savannas, it doesn't matter what kind of environment, but they need to be a part of the city's ecosystem. And this is how we should face climate change. But later on, I will talk more specifically about cities. Yes, Pedro, it's important to remind that Rio has the largest urban forest in the world, which is suffering great impacts also. Now let us hear Hamangai Pataxó. Good evening, everyone. My name is Amangai. I am from the Pataxó tribe of the state of Bahia. My father is Pataxó, my mother is Terena, so two peoples brought together. I was born in Bahia in the Atlantic forest biome. With regards to the importance of the forest to the city and of the city to the forest, I think that Pedro has already touched upon the fact that they are interdependent. So if we stop and think about the water that comes out of our taps in the city, the water is flowing out because there are people in the forest that are doing the little minor work of taking care of their area so that the water and to preserve the springs so that the water can flow to all those who are in the city also. And with the severe climate change, drinking water is a big issue, both in the city and in the rural areas. And therefore, we are planting forests, but it's not only a matter of planting forests. We need to plant water. We need to understand that we can no longer look at the city and consider the city as something or as a space that is evolved and civilized, that the city is a space for development. We must recognize and acknowledge the wealth that comes from the forest and of the peoples who live and depend on the green, on the forest. And this is a reflection that also includes what we eat in the city, small acts that we can carry out to help conserve the space. We have to value family agriculture. We have to value the pure air we breathe that is enabled by the forest. So I think that in the city, I am a young indigenous person. I left my tribe 4 years ago to study in the city. And when I arrived in the city, uh, the biggest issue for me was the noise. In the forest, we wake up with the music and the chant of the birds. In the city, you wake up with noise of people walking around and cars honking. And it is so important to connect to yourself. And when you're in the city, this connection is lost gradually. That is why it's so important to preserve the forests. They take care of us. They are our mother. They give us our food, but they give us our water and the air we breathe. We need forests to survive. And in the city, this different reality with all the noise. And now during the pandemic, so many people having to deal with anxiety, and because the access to the green areas is so limited within the cities. If you look around in the cities, the greener areas are the richest areas. They're not the peripheries where most of the population lives. So the planting forests in the cities needs to happen in all areas of the cities. Green areas are a right of all the inhabitants of the city, not only the rich ones. And not only trees for the sake of trees, we need fruit trees also. Once in my tribe, there was a project, and a road was to be expanded there, and they cut down a jackfruit tree, all of it. We need to plant fruit trees in the cities also. They are very important because they give us food. Even in the cities, they can give you access to food, to fruit, equal access. And the forest also marks the limits of the indigenous lands. And the fight of the indigenous people for their land is a fight for land to all people, and also for plants and animals, because when you degrade an area, when you destroy an area, the animals, they run away and they reach the cities. And this exposes the urban population to different diseases. So if you don't respect your own space and other people's space, things will only worsen for both sides. So we need to plant water, we need to plant trees, and beyond that, we need to plant that seed which will bring change to our society. We need to plant faith. We need to plant love, this seed of change that will help us to recognize ourselves and our role in changing our environment. It's a small function, a small role, but which can change many hearts. Thank you, Amangai. So important for you that you have brought up the problem of drinking water. It's a serious issue in many areas of Brazil. And we know that the water cycle depends on a number of regions connected and covering both cities and forests. Let us hear Mametu Nangetu now. Good evening. And I would like to ask for the permission of my ancestors and of you, and especially our great mother, the mother of the forest is our mother. I am Mametu Nangetu from the city of Belém do Pará in the Amazon. I plant trees in the city streets. I learned this with my grandfather. He was from the state of Rio Grande do Norte. And since I was a small child, he taught me to nurture this great love for Mother Nature. We traditional peoples, we do not live without the forests, because to us, the forest is the god Oxóssi. We need the forests and water for everything, everything that is done in our traditions uses leaves with respect to Oxóssi. We don't remove one leaf more than we need. That is considered a sin for us when you take more plants than you will use. When I see the major impacts caused in the Amazon and all the suffering and hardships, even the fish are are suffering with disease. And we have heard of people dying because they are eating these fish that have disease. And I'm suffer with that. I was born here in Pará, and when I was young, the weather was so pleasant. It wasn't as hot as it is today. And then the rain falls, and then it becomes even hotter. And now in Belém, we also have areas where sleet. So the Amazon is crying out for help from other countries to help us with all the deforestation, with the devastation, all the fires especially. This is the death of the forests. And here in Belém do Pará, in the Amazonas, and other states in the north of Brazil see these impacts very strongly. The Amazon River is the big river. The Amazon forest is our mother. And their problem is bringing suffering to the whole world. And I think about it since I am a planter of trees on the streets. I am a street tree planter. Some years ago, all backyards had a kind of a structure with a small wooden cover where you plant, where we planted many of the plants that we eat. And we also had animals, especially to give us food, but also to nurture the trees. Today, when we feed our cat, because with the pandemic, many cats have come to our religious yards. And even the birds come after the cat feed. All the animals are eating feed. I have some family living in the rural areas, and I ask them to bring fruit so that I can feed all these animals. I have some fruit trees in my yard, but very little. So this cry for help that we, traditional peoples of African descent, know that if the forest is destroyed, our traditions will also be destroyed. I bathe in leaves, and when I offer leaves to an animal, it has to eat the leaf. But if he doesn't want it, I won't give it. So we are crying out for help to other countries, other groups to help us fight against all these adversities. And when a forest is destroyed and killed, when a tree falls, you can see there is always a source of water under that tree. And my sadness and my disappointment also for having a government that is so cruel and does not preserve our great mother. They don't respect women. They don't respect diverse groups. They don't respect different religions. They don't respect homosexuals. They don't respect Brazil. They don't respect our big mother nature. And I'm sorry for uh, bringing all, sharing so much suffering with you, because I have been chosen to be a counselor of my city, and I will work to plant more trees in our streets. The former mayor, he would have the trees I planted cut down, but now I have been given a new chance to plant traditional African trees, the sacred trees as we consider them. So I bring sacred trees to everyone in my religion, as well as fruit trees. So this is me pouring out my heart to you because of this feeling we have suffering together with the Amazon forest. Very sad. Thank you for the opportunity to defend our Mother Nature together with you. Thank you, Mameto. Very important for you to pour out your suffering. I remember a previous event with somebody who also worked with the forest peoples. She said that if you never heard a tree falling, you never heard its sad cry, because you can hear a tree's sad cry when it falls. So it's much more than material suffering. Let us go on to our individual questions, and then we will open for questions and comments from our public. Going back to Pedro, how are cities in Brazil engaging with the climate commitments? And what are the greatest opportunities and challenges for the cities to adjust to sustainability models, considering our national context with so much difference between states and cities? A very broad question, but you only have 5 minutes to answer. Yes, this is a very complex and broad question, but thank you because we will reflect on it. I also want to thank Hamangai and Mameto for their comments. I was also very touched by their suffering. The current administration is providing a lot of suffering and for especially for the traditional peoples. That is why it's so important to hear Hamangai talking about the noises in the city, the lack of connection between the city and the forest, and the different studies that show how important it is for people to be in touch with the forest, with their ecosystem. Several studies show children children who grow up in more contact with nature, running around barefoot, have a better immunity. So being part of the ecosystem, this is the big thing. And before going into the specific answer, what the cities need to do from now on, I would like to talk about a barrier that is found in the cities, which is the rejection in cities to different cultures. Because for many people, the fact that their streets are of asphalt and cement, it means evolution and civilization. This is also accompanied by the lack of investment in the more vulnerable areas. So sometimes you have a plant species that has many leaves falling according to the season, and then the leaves fall, but they clog the drains, and their roots are also very strong and break the sidewalks, and the government does nothing to repair the sites. And therefore, I've seen many arguments against having trees in the city where the population simply says they don't want trees because the trees they litter their area, they reduce their security because people can climb the trees and from there jump into their houses. So it's very strange to think like that. Now, speaking about the cities, I do think cities have a great potential for adaptation. Most of our population lives in cities in Brazil. Of course, with the pandemic, these numbers can be reviewed because there was a large number of people who moved out of the city because of the pandemic. And you have areas that suffer more from the droughts and floods and that are caused by climate change in the cities. So it's a matter of changing the culture of the cities. Now, talking about the city governments, there is currently a movement towards the nature-based solutions. That is, observing nature, recovering nature, and mimicking it in the cities so that you can adapt and adjust the urban centers to climate change. So one form is recovering the urban centers. Another form is urban architect or urban agriculture, planting proper trees, selecting the proper trees to plant that will improve the local economy of the cities, and also which will improve the air quality. All these benefits that the ecosystems bring when they are healthy, they are not measured, they are not considered at the beginning of any project. cities can plan for large, for strong rains that fall periodically and regularly. And sometimes they dig a channel to collect all that water, but they don't think about the air quality, the food, the space for religion practice. And there is this movement to reintroduce the nature-based solutions, but this is still very incipient. At C40, we work with the cities of Salvador, Curitiba, Rio, and São Paulo. Many of these cities are already beginning to build the so-called rain gardens, gardens that absorb rain and also function as gardens, as green spaces in the city. So to me, what is the big barrier for this to happen in cities? Well, of course, it is cultural first and foremost. We must understand that the integration between nature and urban setting is feasible, and we need to work on it. And we need to ensure that the perspective of nature-based solutions be used in all the public policies, because we do have some pilot projects, but they need to be part of our everyday life in the cities. For example, a city is planning to open a new road or street. They go there, and then the environmental department decides to include some green areas along that road. Why don't we do that before we plan for the new road? We have to include the ecosystem in our plans since the beginning. If we want to have a green city, we must understand that the old buildings that will be remodeled or new buildings include the environmental concern in their designs so that the environment does not come in a later phase. The environment has to be considered since the beginning in all projects, also in education, so that we can educate people in the public schools. And therefore, all the public policies must include this. And in C40, we have the Declaration of Nature in Cities that all the 40 mayors of the C40 cities committed to have up to 20% of the city's areas to be permeable and also green, and that all the population is at least 15 minutes away from a green area, so that the green areas are not concentrated in the wealthier regions of the cities. So wherever you are, you have to take into account the climate risks and ensure that green spaces will be built so that all of the population of the city can access its benefits. Well, this is basically what I have to say. I do have a lot more, but we can talk about it later on in our discussion. Thank you, Pedro. Very interesting when you mentioned the rejection and denial of the environment. This is something that I witnessed. I have been working in the Maré slums area since 2011. And when we met back then, I was working on this project to plant trees in the communities. And we went from door to door. And on the first door, the owner of the house said, "No, I don't want any trees. It's going to litter the street. The people will gather here because of the shadow. I don't want trees here." And we were in shock. We were not expecting that reaction. But we realized that We are not educated to love trees. We're educated to use trees as lumber to build our houses in the slums. Since the governments do not help poorer people to have their homes, we use the wood to build our homes. So it's so important to talk about how education has this important role of teaching people the importance of having green areas and trees. So now, after 10 years, we are finally seeing some positive results, and we are managing to plant more trees in the Maré slums. Going on with our conversation, I will ask Mametu's question because she will have to leave us, unfortunately, before we finish. So, Mametu, about the traditional knowledge of the African descent religious faith, how can you defend the environment and the fight against climate change? We love nature. We traditional peoples, we see Oxóssi as the owner of the leaves. So first there were the indigenous people, and then the people of African descent. We try to teach everyone to love nature, because if we don't have leaves, we won't have our god Oxóssi. So we are also struggling in the political arena to elect a mayor, as we did here in the city of Belém, who is in favor of nature, who encourages us to plant. And this helps us to rebuild a city. Belém is known as the city of mango trees, but it has been devastated because at least one previous mayor said that mango trees are not considered plants. And in our African religions, we use open spaces as our temples, and our slave ancestors brought trees to be planted. But this also causes problems. Our neighbors also do not want leaves littering their yards, but they don't realize what those trees bring to the context as a whole. For example, I live in an avenue with many trees, and I have a very pleasant breeze in my yard, totally different from the temperature inside my house. So the green favors the weather, but the neighbors don't see the benefits. They only consider the leaves that litter the streets. So I go to a forest area. I go along the streets of the city by myself. I take seedlings. I prepare the soil. I bring fresh soil, and I help people to plant them. And I teach people to do as I do. Every 3 months, we take care of the plants. But there is a word from, she mentioned an African phrase saying that if we're not together, If we don't have the forest, we will not have our orishas, and we will simply disappear. So we're very sad when we see a forest fire because we know that a spring and a source of nature and a god is dying there because we have many gods of the forest. But when we see a fire, one of the gods is dying there. And if we do not conserve Mother Nature, we will not have religion any longer. If we don't have fresh water, which is Oshu, if we don't have salt water, which is Iemanjá, if we don't have the forests, which are Oxóssi, if we don't have the leaves represented by Catendê, if we don't have mud and earth, which is also a product, because wherever there is mud, there is green. So either you fight and struggle to preserve the forests and the mud and the earth, or else we will simply cease to exist. And our religion will also cease to exist. So I'm looking for a word. Our hope is that countries can help us to conserve the Amazon and the climate that we used to have, which was so good and pleasant. And now we see all those tall buildings that were built along the riverbanks and killing the nature around the rivers. And we've been fighting for many years in the city of Belém until we were finally able to elect a good mayor, our friend, who is also helping to recover the green. So your programs are so good because they raise awareness among the youth so that they also plant, so that they also preserve and help to conserve the forest. I was a close friend to Doris Stang, who was murdered. She fought heartlessly to preserve the forests. I'm checking the clock to know if I can stay for a little longer. It's still 10 minutes to 7, so you can stay with us for some time still. Thank you very much. I will be at your disposal whenever you call me to participate. And I will be very grateful to work with you because the Amazon, the forests, the birds, Mother Oshun, Oxóssi, all the gods, so that all the gods can go on living. Thank you, Mameto. Your comments brought a very important reflection that it is important to plant, it is important to have individual actions. But we need to learn how to vote with a proper consciousness because we need people to develop a favorable environmental policy. Now, my question for Amangai Pataxó. How can the ancestral knowledge and the struggle of indigenous peoples in the defense of their land, what can all this teach to the city about sustainability? I believe that the first point I would like to make is about everybody acknowledging that traditional knowledge is also science. They must acknowledge, value, and respect our knowledge. In my people, we say that all indigenous people have science. We have the science of Jurema. This is science that you don't find in the academy, in the university. You find this science in Indian territory, indigenous territory. And we have many authors in our territory that teach youth to continue our struggle for life. So the struggle of the indigenous people has been going on for thousands of years, and it is still the same message. But the city and the people in the city are simply not open to hear what the indigenous peoples have to say and have been saying for so long. I heard in all three comments the rejection, the resistance of people in planting trees, in planting a seed, complaining about the dirt and the leaves littering, thinking that that plants and trees are more of a problem than of a benefit. And this is not in their nature. It's simply how they were educated and how they were brought up. Our society is brought up in this model that is so aggressive to us and hurts us every day. Indigenous children are brought up with a different vision of nature, of land and water and territory. When we grow up, we learn how to respect the smallest plant. My mother was the prayer or the pray sayer of our people, and she would ask for permission of nature to even scoop out a small handful of earth. And now in the cities, I see people don't talk to each other, so individualistic. They stay inside their homes alone. I believe that the cosmovision of the indigenous people, the way we see the world, is so different from what this system teaches people. So we grow up with trees by us. So I learn from the tree. I learn by observing its growth. If any of you stopped for some time in a green area and looked at a tall tree and the way the wind touches it, what I learn from the way that the wind moves and sways the plants, it is the silence of nature that teaches us how we should live in harmony with nature. Nature itself teaches us, but it's not hanging on there, and it's giving us signals and cries of help, because the power that comes from the water and from the forest is holding back the physical wars, the spiritual wars that we are experiencing. Shaman David Copenau wrote a book called The Heaven Falling, and what holds things from becoming even worse in society is the respect that we cultivate in the indigenous lands. And people need to learn with the indigenous people the feeling of sharing, of harmony, of union. We consider each other as relatives, even if we are from different peoples, from different biomes, from different regions. We are all relatives. In our movement between different indigenous peoples, which are all different from each other, makes us consider that we are brothers and sisters. If a child can learn about the history of its people with simple games by the river, other children also need to have this happening to them, that they are not deprived from this experience, They need this so that they can develop their personal values, individual values. And these come from sharing, from union, from love. These are the antidotes that our society needs so badly. We need to be more silent and listen to the forest and to the indigenous people who are bringing their knowledge from thousands of years. So learning is respecting land and seeing yourself as the son or daughter of the land and not the owner of the land. We experience sustainability. So the question is, what seeds do we expect to plant? Indigenous youth have been planting many seeds. We are seeds from our ancestors, and now we continue the mission of disseminating seeds, be it through social media or other tools, paper, pen, our voices, our chants. This is what we need to do, to plant seeds and to consider ourselves as seedlings. Thank you, Hamangai. So important, this view of respect and humanity for sustainability. It is a concept that involves a lot more than we think. And I invite our viewers to write your questions in our chat. And while we are waiting for questions from our public, I would like to ask you some more questions. Hamangai talked about the youth and we are also talking about how in the cities, the youth has been more engaged in the climate actions. So I want to know how the different youths from the city, from the African cultures, from the indigenous tribes, what the youth is doing and how can we collaborate with them. Mametu, can you be the first one to answer since you'll have to leave? I always take the youth with me. We have the guidao. It is a ceramic recipient that I use. I use this material and I speak the areas where where there is this earth and mud that produces this kind of ceramic, and we like to write on it in order to save paper. And again, mentioning all our gods. Abaluae is the one that represents Mother Nature, and we are all children of the earth and of nature. So I like to teach the youth to respect the leaves. When I ask them to collect leaves for me, I see that they will only collect the number of leaves that we will actually need for our ceremonies. So we need to respect the youth. This is so important because we know that they will be the future priests in our religion, and they will teach their own children. I am 75 years old, and I guide the young girls and boys, and I know that later on in the future, when they start their own religious practices, they will do what I taught them to do. I have been working over 30 years with the conservation of the environment. I teach them that when we go out fishing in the river, that we should fish only for the number of fish that we require to eat. I think that older generations have to teach the younger generations to respect our great Mother Earth and Mother Nature. I will leave you now. Thank you enormously. And please do count on me always, because I will always have some time to talk about the traditions, and that without forest and water, our Mother Nature will cease to exist. Thank you very much. My greetings to all of you who are here and who will go on here. Greetings from my heart. Thank you for being with us. Now, so let us continue. We have the question that I asked about the youth. If you wish, you can answer, but I will add another question so that you can answer that too. Pedro, are there spaces for dialogue and participation for the civil society to influence these areas somehow and these decisions concerning the climate in the cities? Pedro can answer, and then I will give the floor to Hamangai. Yes, of course I can answer. Well, this situation varies from one city to the other, and they are somehow organized by civil society. Some areas in Rio, for example, there is an association at Televia. They are very active. They have a group of about 50 people who plant trees in the street. And if somebody cuts them off, they call the police, and this works. There are also the sub-regions in the cities that have the sub-administrations. They take care of these sub-regions, and they take demands from those regions to the mayor of the city. And this improves dialogue. Of course, I am talking about these solutions in general because it changes from one city to the other. Nowadays, with technology, we have new channels. For example, in Rio, we had a period of 3 months of public hearings and public comments where in the internet, people could go in and discuss and leave their comments and opinions, and that would go to the city administration. So we can use internet tools, open tools, and also strengthen the area where we live, our own neighborhood. Because one interesting thing about cities is that you have everyday demands. When you go up to the state and federal level, you have more macro, high-level demands. But in the cities, you have more immediate issues to be solved by the mayor. So it's very important that the civil society struggles to open these channels for communicating with the city administration and keep them open, use them. Did I answer your question? Yes, you did. But if you want to talk about how you see the youth movements. Sure. Well, I am an enthusiast. I think that the energy brought by youth is something incredible. It's interesting that you see people who are beginning to act environmentally, and they simply want to do everything. They have such strength and power, much more than people who have 20, 30 years of experience and much more knowledge, but they are tired because they had so many doors closed upon them. With a pandemic, things are quite difficult for the youth because now you see digital activism, which is a totally new world for us. Of course, we have the internet around for some time, but it's hard. And I believe that universities are very powerful to gather the youth. I have participated in some agroecology groups. It's a very interesting perspective about using the forest for production, for well-being, and many groups of youth contributed with great ideas for that practice. I think that here in Brazil and also globally, we should have more space for to hear the youth. But I think that before that, we need to understand how we can provide more space, especially in this very complex world and with a pandemic, which is an enormous crisis. Many young people are having to work to help their families, to pay their bills. So it's very hard for them to focus on anything else right now because they have to help their families, which need them. Also, bringing us back to some practices and movements, the Practice for Future, led by youth, will have a general strike tomorrow because of the climate. So if you want to learn more about it, it's a very important movement that is led by youth. Amangai, your chance to talk to us about the differences between cities and forests. I was also in Brasilia in the camp out for indigenous land. We gathered 6,000 indigenous people from different tribes around the country. We camped there for some time, and I remained with my group. I couldn't stay all the way to the Women's March, but I was there for on many of the activities, and I was very proud to see the power of indigenous youth organizing, communicating, disseminating what was going on, and even monitoring and filming the decision about the indigenous lands. And they were helping, bringing food and water to the activists. And there was also a discussion of choosing nominations, of having nominations for indigenous leaders for national groups. And I was very proud to see young indigenous individuals helping so much, especially many girls holding their cameras and cell phones, taking pictures, making small films and documentaries, registering our struggle and giving visibility to the reality of the indigenous people. That was a very strong thing, strong feeling I had there. Even in the middle of the pandemic, we had to leave our safe homes to claim for our right to our land. And the youth that were also with us in the camp and others who were in different bases around the country, always very actively helping. I was very proud. And in general, with regards to the spaces, what I see is that many decisions are made behind closed doors. A lot of decisions are made about the youth without our presence, especially the indigenous youth. We are not heard. And therefore, we must have a focus on different realities and contexts. You don't have one youth, you have different youths, youth groups. So they make the decisions behind the closed doors, but we are outside ready to tear down those doors, but not with violence, rather with politeness, with value, with righteousness. And the indigenous youth are being very bold, and this brings about change which the global leaders are not bringing about. A recent interview with 8,000 youth from many countries, including Brazil, and all 8,000 youths produced a letter about the climate that will be delivered during COP26 in November in Scotland. And this letter is a request, a demand to bring up commitments to stop climate change, effective commitments. So we see that this movement is very strong, and it is organized and led by young people. So even without the resources to participate in COP26, we are talking about it in the social media. We are talking to politicians. We are talking to our city government. We are engaging with them. We are seeing ourselves as the agent of change. And I also want to announce the collective funding of 13 indigenous teenagers. 11 of them are girls between 18 and 27 years old, and they have started this crowdfunding so that these representatives of Brazilian youth can be present at COP26. So the crowdfunding is open in the Engaja movement social media. You please visit the websites and the social media. Our work and our actions are done as we see them. We use whatever we have at hand, social media, or we go out there ourselves. And this struggle goes from one generation to the next. And it is a struggle that is so urgent because of the health crisis. We are in a hurry, and we want to have our lands defined. This is our struggle, and we will continue to mobilize and to inspire other youth groups in different contexts. Please follow the social media of our articulation, of our network also. It's very important to know about the reality of the indigenous groups. So please follow the networks and social media of the different indigenous groups and associations. Thank you, Hamangai. And we have a comment on the chat talking about how this movement is invisible. So it's so important that people who know about the topic is aware, but it's not present in the major media. So we need to spread the word. We have one last question from our public, which is connected to that. It is the following. How do you think this invisibility happens? Why does it happen? And even the more progressive leftist channels, do you think that it's hard for them also to keep up with your movements and actions? I can comment on this briefly, but I think Hamangai has more to talk about this. It's a very difficult question. The world today involves so much, but the current administration is simply creating situations which, how can I put it? They create facts simply to be in the media, and they're not actually important compared to the enormous crisis we see in our country. We have 14 million people that are jobless, and they're discussing whether hydrochloroquine works or not. This is a past, this discussion has gone already, and they use this as a smokescreen to obstruct the reality. Now, with regards to the leftist movements, I don't know how to explain why they are not focusing on the importance of this moment. Maybe Hamangai can explain this. This invisibility is historical. Since the invasion of Brazil by Europeans to the current day, we are invisible, and this non-visibility of traditional peoples, indigenous peoples, means a denial of our own history. So this lack of knowledge about the real history of the real Brazil does not appear in the major media. They have different interests, they have different funding sources with their own interests, and they're not worried about what happens in indigenous lands, their invasions. That is why we have seen more indigenous youth being communicators, filmers, film producers, and actors. Since we see that we are invisible, we are trying to appear by ourselves. We have the Pataxó TV, we have the India media, we have so much content that is produced by the indigenous peoples themselves, especially the young influencers. We have several influencers who are little by little becoming more popular in the social media and different communication channels. And this inspires other youths to engage and to use whatever you have at hand to give visibility to what is happening to us in our territory. So little by little, I think we are showing our footprint. So get prepared, because our headdress will come with full power, and we will continue to come with our full headdress, and we will make a good and strong footprint. Wow, that was a great final thought for our rich dialogue between distinct realities which converge from their micro spaces to this common space that we provide here. It's also very important to connect to the different spiritualities and how the different perspectives and religions and visions of the world can contribute to one common world. Very important. I want to thank Pedro, Hamangai, Mameto, who had to leave us earlier. We thank you very much for bringing your ideas. This live streaming has been translated into English for the New York Climate Week, so it will be included in this international event. It will also remain in our Faith and Climate channel. We will include other sessions we have been preparing. Thank you very much to our public and the technical team, CoLab 208, Faith and Climate, and ISER, and all those who are with us. Thank you. Thank you, Hamangai. It was a great